I enrolled in a psychology degree at 57 years old. I want to tell you why, and what it's teaching me that 30 years in the CEO role didn't. When people hear that, the reaction is usually one of two things. Either they think it's admirable, a CEO going back to study, good for him, or they wonder what's missing. Why would someone with that much experience feel like they need to go back to a classroom? But both reactions miss the point. I didn't enroll because I felt like something was missing from my career. I enrolled because what I kept seeing in the executives I work with now, and what I finally understood I'd been watching for 30 years without the language to name it precisely. So let me explain what I mean. In 30 years as a CEO and managing director, I watched highly capable executives struggle with things that had nothing to do with their capability. They make decisions that contradicted what they knew to be right. They'd hold on to people far too long, not because they couldn't see the problem, but because something in them couldn't make the call. They build strategies that were technically sound and then quietly undermine their own execution in ways they couldn't see. I watched executives who were generally brilliant in calm conditions become someone different under sustained pressure. Not dramatically different, but subtly different. The way they listened changed, the way they received information changed, and the way they made decisions changed. And the version of themselves that emerged under that pressure was often the one that determined whether they kept the confidence of their board or lost it. I used to think this was a leadership problem, a skills problem, something you could address with better frameworks or more experience or a different approach to decision making. 30 years of watching it told me that wasn't right, but I didn't have the language to explain precisely why. Psychology is giving me that language. Here is what the research actually shows. There is a substantial body of work in psychology built across decades around how the patterns we develop early in life shape the way we function as adults, particularly under pressure, particularly in relationships involving authority and accountability. And it's called attachment theory, one of the most well-established frameworks in development psychology. It tells us that the way we learn to relate to significant people in our early lives creates a template, a set of unconscious expectations about how relationships work, whether trust is safe, whether honesty has a cost, whether it's possible to be fully seen and still be accepted. That template doesn't disappear when you walk into a boardroom. It travels with you, and it shows up often most clearly in the most of the moments of greatest pressure, in how you relate to your board, your executive team, and the people whose opinion of you carries the most weight. An executive who learned early that approval was conditional, that performance was the price of acceptance, will behave differently under scrutiny than the one who had a more secure foundation. They'll be more likely to manage perception rather than reality, more likely to hold information back, more likely to make decisions designed to avoid criticism rather than achieve outcomes. That pattern doesn't come from bad leadership habits. It comes from something much earlier, and no amount of leadership training reaches it. There is also research on what psychologists call the window of tolerance. Under sustained stress, the kind that the CEO role generates constantly, month after month, year after year, the nervous system has a threshold. Below that threshold, a person can think clearly. They have access to their full cognitive capacity. They can read situations accurately and respond with judgment. Above that threshold, when the pressure exceeds what the nervous system can absorb, people either shut down or become reactive. Their perception narrows, their thinking becomes more rigid. They start operating from a much smaller version of themselves. Where that threshold sits, how much pressure someone can absorb before they lose access to their best thinking, was largely shaped in childhood. It can be developed, but it has to be worked on deliberately. It doesn't just improve with experience. The executive I watched struggle over 30 years weren't lacking skill or experience. They were hitting the edges of patterns and thresholds that were set long before they ever ran a business. And here's what that means practically. Most of what determines how an executive performs when the stakes are highest, how they respond under pressure, how they relate to authority, how they handle genuine uncertainty, what they do when they're afraid, is not located in their professional development at all. It's located in something earlier, something more fundamental. No amount of leadership frameworks, competency models, or executive education programs get to that. Not because those things aren't valuable, but because they're working at the wrong level. They're building capabilities on top of patterns that were formed before the person had any choice in the matter. And that's not a comfortable idea. And it's not something most leadership development programs want to acknowledge. Because if it's true, and the research suggests that it is, then the work required is more fundamental than another course, more personal than another model to follow. It requires actually looking at the patterns, understanding where they come from, developing the capacity to see them operating in real time, in the boardroom, in the difficult conversation, in the moment the pressure arrives, and having enough of a relationship with yourself to choose a different response. That is the interior game I talk about in Deep Leadership. Not as a concept, not as a framework, as a lived practice. Psychology has given me the precision to understand it at a level I couldn't before, and to work with it far more effectively with the executives I now coach. I'm currently 58. I sit in tutorials with students who are young enough to be my children. I write essays, I do exams, I turn up to lectures, and take notes. And I want to tell you honestly, I've not learned anything in my professional life that is more directly useful to the work I do now than what I am learning in that degree. Not the K&S turnaround, not my time in the military, not the years as a Vistage chair. Because this is the level the real work happens at. And most people, most organizations, and most leadership programs never go there. If you're a senior executive who has done every program, who has the MBA like me, and the coaching and the 360-degree feedback in the executive education, who has ticked every visible box of professional development, and who still privately feels like the real work hasn't been touched. This is what I mean by the real work. There's a link below. Let's have a 30-minute conversation. It's not a pitch, no agenda beyond an honest discussion about where you are and whether what I do is relevant for you right now. I'm Greg Stevenson. This is Deep Leadership. Let's get to work.